Hey there, it's Clark, and today I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite Bible stories. And it's actually three stories in one. It's the story of Simon Peter and his faith journey. And I like this story because in many ways it mirrors my own faith journey and probably many of yours. So we start off with the first time that Peter meets Jesus, as told in Luke chapter 5. And Peter at the time went by the name Simon, and Simon was a fisherman by trade, and he's been fishing all night with his buddies James and John and with his brother Andrew, and they'd caught nothing. And so, extremely exhausted and tired, they pull into shore the next morning, and they see this man Jesus preaching on the shore. Jesus needs a little bit of help to get to a better vantage point in order to preach to the people, so he asks them if he can stand in his boat. So they agreed to do that, and when he's done preaching, they tell him about how they'd had such bad luck fishing that previous night. Jesus tells them to push out to the sea one more time and to cast their nets one more time. Now, at this point, Simon's probably thinking this Jesus guy, he may be a great rabbi who can preach a good sermon, but he doesn't know anything about fishing, does he? So he would have been completely justified to politely decline Jesus' request, but he didn't. You know, maybe it was something about the message that Simon just heard Peter preaching. Maybe it was with the authority with which that Jesus spoke, but he agreed to cast out, throw his nets out, and amazingly, they catch so many fish that their nets begin to break, and they have to ask James and John to come over and help. And so at this point, Simon falls to his knees and tells Jesus that he's a sinner. And Jesus says, "Don't be afraid. If you follow me, I'll make you a fisher of people." So with this simple act of faith and a confession of sin, Jesus gives Simon a new name of Peter, and he begins his journey with Jesus as one of his first disciples. But you have to remember that he had to tell Peter not to be afraid. So, in our next scene, we'll fast forward to Matthew chapter 14, and it's the end of the feeding the 5,000. Jesus tells his disciples to go on ahead of him. And so they get in their boat and start across the lake. Jesus stays behind to pray. So the disciples, they set out across the lake with the waves and the winds really picking up. And early next morning, Jesus catches up to them. But he's not in a boat. He's actually walking on the water to them. So naturally, they see this guy walking on the water to them. They're naturally afraid. But Jesus says, "It's me. Don't be afraid." And so, as they start to recognize Jesus, Peter says, "If it's you, tell me to come out to the boat to you. Come out to you onto the water." And so, Jesus says, "Come." And Peter steps out of the boat and amazingly begins to walk on the water towards Jesus. But he looks down and sees the wind and the waves crashing beneath his feet, and he begins to be afraid. And when that happens, he starts to sink, and he calls out and he says, "Lord, save me." And so Jesus reaches down, takes his hand, and helps him back into the boat, saying, "Oh, you of little faith, why do you doubt?" And so you can see Peter, as he's taking this journey, he wants to have faith, but he's still afraid. So we fast forward to the end of John's Gospel, chapter 21. Jesus is dead and is resurrected, and has appeared to the disciples a couple times before. But he hasn't been with them for a while, and so Peter and his fishing buddies decide to go out again. And they've been fishing all night, and they've been having just as bad a luck as they had the first time that they met Jesus, that fateful day a few years earlier. So, having not caught anything and being exhausted, they throw the next morning, and they're about 100 yards away from shore, and someone from the shoreline calls them saying, "Hey, have you caught anything?" Of course, they roll their eyes and say, "No." This man on the shore says, "Why don't you cast your net out on the other side of the boat?" So they roll their eyes again, and not having any better ideas at this point, decide to throw their nets out. And like deja vu, they begin to catch so many fish that their nets are almost about to break. So at that moment, they realize it's the Lord. And Peter jumps out of the boat. Now, he doesn't jump out of the boat like a normal person who would, if you're about 100 yards away from the shore, if you want to get to the shore as soon as possible, you're probably going to take your clothes off, down your swimsuits, and try to swim. But Peter does the opposite. He actually takes his outer robe and puts it on before stepping out of the boat. And so, in this, what I think is a hilarious scene in the Bible, there's got to be one or two things going through Peter's head right now. Either one, he is so overjoyed to see Jesus that he's just not thinking straight. Or, could it be perhaps that he actually thinks that this time he can walk on water because he's no longer afraid? Either way, it doesn't matter in the end. But what I really like is that this faith journey that Peter has gone on is very similar to my own and probably similar to yours. With a simple act of faith and a confession of sin, we take our first steps as disciples of Jesus, gung-ho and with all the zeal we can muster. But as tends to happen to us, the storms of life distract us, beat us down, and cause us to take our eyes off of Jesus. At this point, we usually begin to sink. And as our head begins to go underneath the dark waters, we would call out to Jesus to save us. And Jesus always is there to take our hands, pull us up, and put us back in the boat. And finally, I like Peter, similar to Peter, I look forward to the day that I can see Jesus in his restored form. Maybe when that day comes, I too feel like I could walk on water. Can't wait to try.